Good evening and welcome to the virtual world of the Citizen Network of Protection. Tonight we will be doing the review of the Evanston Police first quarter 2020 transparent report. But before we get to the report, I would like to tell you something about the CNP. Most of you have heard me say that the Citizen Network of Protection is a group of citizens, and we are happy to let you know that we have stayed steady in our fight to make an independent police review. And in that process, we have become a 501c3 organization that will give us some status, and we can select your donation, which we do hope you will give to us. And our goals have stayed the same to include promoting racial and economic justice with the legal system, preventing government overreach and abuse of the area of law enforcement, and upholding the civil rights within the community. Tonight, we will be going over things in the first quarter to review. The first thing we have is the chief and the Snapchat, which Janine Henry will present. Next, we will have the IDOT versus the Citizen Evanston data disparity, the Stop and Frisk versus Pat Down, that will be done by Austin Spiller. Then we will have the Evanston Police Review Commission update that Carlos Sutton will bring to us. So Denise.
Hello, everyone. Okay, on Tuesday, February 18th, 2020, Citizen Network of Protection was notified that Chief Cook from the Evanston Police Department had uploaded about 40 old mug shots of Black males and a Black female onto his personal Snapchat account. Some of those were deceased and most of them was living, but he on some of them he had DOA by their name, and one of them had HIV by his name. February 19th, 2020, we reached out to the EPD media coordinator for a copy of the department social media guide. After learning about this, we were told that there will be a press conference. We looked on the city website, the City of Evanston website, and did not see anything posted. So basically, what I would say, this was going to be a surprise press conference with no public notice. So on Friday, February 21st, 2020 at 9:30 a.m., a press conference was held at the firehouse on Lake Street. No public notice was sent out. On February 29th, 2020, CNP emailed interim city manager and Evanston police chief asking these questions. Why wasn't there a public announcement of Chief Cook's press conference through community communication channels, such as the City of Evanston, EPD social media accounts, and websites? Second question was, why wasn't a person on this assistant city manager's cell phone introduced to the public so the public would know who was asking the questions, and why wasn't he or she questions repeated back to the public at the conference? Another question we had was, what current cases or incidents has happened that the EPD would need to pull these old mugshots? And our last one, make sure. Why wasn't the city and the EPD policies made available to the public at the conference, more than just saying that we do not follow DOJ and the U.S. Marshal policies for posting pictures with no apparent reason? And last, I have CNP has read several articles published about the press conference that seem to have information that occurred outside of the press conference. We would like a copy of the statement that you read at the press conference and any additional statements about the incident that was given to various media outlets. No response. So on March 24th, 2020, we follow up by email to the intern city manager, Erica Storley, and Evanston Police Chief Cook. CNP received no response. So today is April 21st. And again, CNP has received no response. Thank you.
We ready for Austin to tell about the data stuff which we did alert the city to these lack of accuracy in the reporting. So Austin, take us through this.
Great. Thank you so much, Betty. And good evening, everybody. I really appreciate you joining us and learning more about issues about transparency with the City of Evanston and Evanston Police Department. One of the things that I'd like to discuss is with data integrity. We will be talking about like stop and frisks and the data that gets collected and sent to the Illinois Department of Transportation. It is required by law, by Illinois law, that all police departments record this information and send it to IDOT. This is what you'll see on the screen. This is a copy of the form that police departments fill out. You're going to have things like the name of the officer, times of the stops, even the duration. Will include data about race, the reason for the stop, the type of violation, and the result of the stop. You'll also notice that like in section B, there's some really valuable information that is there. Was a consent search requested? Was a consent search given? Were there drugs found, alcohol, weapons, how much, things like that. And then in section C, you're gonna have data about police dog sniffs and how those are performed. So this is a screenshot of what appears on the City of Evanston website. There is a data portal that allows visitors to see the number of traffic stops and some initial information about these traffic stops. So what I really want to point out is what is missing between these two data sets, because this is really the crux of the issue that CNP has with the lack of transparency. So you'll notice on the left, you'll look kind of on the bottom of the screen, it says columns in this data set. And you're gonna have like stop time, day of the week, age, race, sex, police beat, and things like that. But if you look at the right side of the screen, you'll notice that like none of this information is given about the traffic stop on the city website. Was there a consent search? Was consent given? Were there drugs found? Was there a dog sniff? All this is very valuable information. And the reason that it's valuable is because with this type of information, we can start to see different patterns and practices. One of the things that we're not going to report on tonight, but what came out through the 2019 IDOT report is that African-American drivers are more likely to have a consent search requested. They're more likely to be searched, and they're more likely to have dog sniffs performed on them. And what's troubling to CNP is that none of that information gets recorded on the city website. Remember, this is information that the Evanston Police Department is collecting and sending to the Illinois Department of Transportation. There is no reason that this information could not also be included on the city website. So really the big question is why? Why is Evanston's public database more restricted than what is given to the Illinois Department of Transportation? And one of the reasons, I think a reasonable hypothesis is because for the last several years, at least going back to 2014 when it was reported that Black drivers were searched more often. At least for the last 5 years, we have hard data that shows that minority communities are searched more often. They're more likely to have dog sniffs performed on them, despite the fact that they are actually less likely to have contraband found. So what this shows is this is evidence of bias, racial profiling. This is evidence of Black and brown communities being over-policed. And really, I think the point that CNP wants to get across is the fact that the city of Evanston, our elected officials, the police department, they have publicly stated that issues of racial equity, bias, and things like that are very important to them. Yet here we have a situation where they have this data at their disposal to inform the public. They could be taking the next steps to actually do analysis on this data and report that to the public, but they're not. And so that's very troubling to the CNP, and it's something that we really hope that the police department will address, as well as the city council and the mayor's office. The next issue that I want to talk about regarding data is that of stop and frisk. It was reported recently in a Daily Northwestern article that the Evanston Police Department has pretty much ended the policy of stop and frisk. However, they are still stopping people and patting them down, and they're using the term pat down, which is kind of a euphemism for a stop and frisk. And again, this data about pat downs, about field contacts, about stop and frisks is not available on the city website. Yet again, this is an issue where by law, the police department is required to submit information to the Illinois Department of Transportation about all pedestrian stops. So this lack of reporting, is troubling because stop and frisk has constitutional issues. We know how this is a policy that has continuously harmed Black and brown communities. And we believe it's a policy that is not helpful for the city of Evanston. Now we do have data from 2017, 2016, and 2015 about what stop and frisk has looked like. This data, the pie charts you see here, these were obtained through a report that Chief Eddington did. The prior police chief, Chief Eddington, he presented a report on stop and frisk to the Human Services Committee. And so this is the type of data that we would expect, the Evanston Police Department and the city of Evanston to put forth on a regular basis. So we do not have data from the last 2 years, regarding stop and frisk. And so, as you noticed on the previous page, the Evanston Police Department, they actually had some data about stop and frisk on their data portal. However, they took it down and they said there was problems with the data. It was a technical glitch. And this was several months ago, and data is still not available, and there have not been corrections made.
Thanks, Austin, for that. Okay, Carl, let's talk about their process that they went through to pass ordinance 79-0-16.
Okay, thank you, Betty. Good evening.
19, the creation of the Citizen Police Review thing.
Right. On October 28th in 2019, the City Council meeting voted on Ordinance 79019, which created an Evanston Police Review Board. It passed 5-2 with only Alderman Simmons and Alderman Fleming in dissent. Following December 9th, the Human Services Committee, after a reminder from the CNP president, Alderman Fleming agrees that the city needs to hold community events around the new Evanston Police Review Board process. On January 1st, The new Evanston Police Board was supposed to launch. However, application process has not even started yet. On March 2nd, the Human Services President and the committee had a meeting at the community explaining the event of the new police board and that no action has been taken to this point. There have been no public events created to inform the residents of the new police review. The board remains with seats unfilled. They haven't heard a case, and we do not even know the process for trying to get on the board. Again, for the people in the back of the room, past city council 6 months ago, there's been no information of an events created. There are empty seats, no cases heard. There's no action at all on 790919.
Austin will now tell us how to fix this.
All right. Thank you, Carlos, and thank you, Betty. The Citizens Network of Protection, for the last several years, we have really done a deep dive into civilian oversight boards across the country. We have read recommendations from the United Nations. We have read recommendations from civil rights leaders, like from the NAACP and the ACLU. In that research, we have come up with a list of recommendations that are necessary for a civilian review board to be effective. And what this graph is going to show is the fact that both the existing accountability system that was in place before 79-0-19 was implemented was ineffective, and we're also going to show how this new proposal, this new ordinance, is also ineffective. And so one of the main reasons where civilian review boards lack teeth is the fact that they are not democratically elected. The mayor appoints them, and this can create somewhat of a conflict of interest. We believe that in a democratic society, institutions like the police really need to be directly accountable to the people, and therefore a democratically elected board is the best way to achieve that goal. Second is the selection of the police chief. Practically all, there are a few exceptions across the country, but practically all civilian review boards do not have the power to hire or fire the police chief. As you'll see, the existing system that was in place, that board did not have the power to hire or fire the police chief. And the new board that we hope will be implemented soon, that can actually hear cases, that board does not have the power to hire or fire the police chief as well. One of the most important things we've read in our research, and also just hearing from Evanston residents, go back one slide, Neil. Yeah, is how the investigations are conducted. We often hear that it's unfair for police officers to investigate the police. And that was the way that the previous system operated, and that is going to be the way that the new system will continue to operate. The CNP recommends that there be independent investigations. That means you need to have full-time independent investigators that are not connected in any manner to the Evanston Police Department. Now, just like really some of the basics. A civilian review board should be performing community outreach to inform residents of the complaint process and the powers and the duties of that board. Yet in the previous system, there was no requirement for this to be done. And in the new board that was created, there is still no requirement for community outreach. In so many other cities across the country, Chicago is a good example. They have broad outreach programs where they are holding weekly and monthly events at libraries, at town halls. They're going to universities, you name it. They are making a big effort to reach out to the community and to tell people how to file complaints and more about that process. Second is the ability to analyze and investigate policing trends and patterns related to EPD officers, and if necessary, to be able to launch investigations of misconduct without an actual complaint being filed. We talked earlier about the traffic stop data and the pedestrian stop data. We need a civilian review board here in Evanston that has the power to be proactive and analyze this data and find trends where there might be officers that are showing signs of racial bias, racial profiling, things like that. Both the previous board that was in place and the board that is in place now, they do not have the power to launch those investigations without a complaint being filed, and they do not have a mandate to analyze the data that is collected. Third, the ability to evaluate the potential racial impact of existing and any new policies the EPD creates, and to involve community organizers and people who work with disadvantaged populations in every step of the process. You know, we talk about the policy of stop and frisk, and how that has been shown over and over again to disparately impact communities of color. Those are the types of policies that we need a board, a civilian review board, to be able to take a hard look at, and to be able to sit down with the police department to come up with alternatives. You know, other areas and issues where, you know, policies might come in play would be things like surveillance, you know, whether it's, you know, drone surveillance, body cameras, you name it. That's another issue where communities of color are disparately impacted. And once again, the previous board and the current board, they do not have that power. And there's no mandate that this board work with the Evanston Police Department to discuss these policies, especially from a lens of racial equity. And that's really what is needed in this city, in the city of Evanston, is to really examine police department policies through a racial equity lens. Fourth, is a mandate that a civilian review board receive, investigate, and resolve all civilian complaints against the police in 120 days or less. In the previous board, there was no requirement, and in the current board, there is no requirement as well. You know, this timetable is very important. You know, people's memories fade, you know, the longer that an investigation carries on, you know, the availability of particular evidence, you know, things like that. And also just the fact that this isn't, when people file a complaint, you know, this is something that people take very seriously. Many times they have been, you know, seriously wronged, and it has a big impact on their life. And so for any civilian review board to have legitimacy, they really need to take those complaints seriously, and they need to have a prompt investigation. Fifth is a mandate that to compel the police chief to explain why he or she has not followed a recommendation. So for example, if you know, this civilian review board issues a finding that the police officer was at fault and was at fault for misconduct and needed to be disciplined, yet the police chief makes a determination that, you know, there really doesn't need to be any discipline, or that the discipline doesn't need to be as severe, or that there actually was no misconduct. Currently, there is no requirement that the police chief make any type of explanation as to why they don't follow the recommendations of the civilian review board. And this we've seen in city after city. This often leaves a sour taste in people's mouth when recommendations aren't followed without a reason, and it only goes to reduce the public's trust of city government, law enforcement, and the investigative process. Six, the ability to provide recommendations aimed at reforming police practices and policies, as well as recommendations that provide alternatives to police. You know, let's take, for example, what we are seeing, you know, now with this pandemic, with COVID-19. Police officers and law enforcement across the country are being asked to enforce stay-at-home orders. In some cases, they're issuing citations. This is an area where, the city of Evanston really needs to think about how it budgets its money and prioritizes the responses. Issues related to public health, like this pandemic, like mental health emergencies, like drug and substance abuse. These are actually areas where public health professionals, social workers would make great first responders. Law enforcement, their role should be to address, violent crime, things like that, issues of mental health, drugs, public health issues like the pandemic. We need a first responder that is not carrying a gun, a taser, and handcuffs. So that is what we need a board to do. We need a board that can be proactive and look at policies where, such as stop and frisk, such as body camera policies, things like that. So that is something that was not present in the previous board. Although, in this new ordinance, there is a section of the ordinance that says that the commission can provide thoughtful policy recommendations. We really need that spelled out. Like, what are these boards' powers? And again, it'd be an issue if they do provide a recommendation and the city of Evanston and the police department chooses not to follow it. We need to be able to compel the police chief to explain why. And finally, a civilian review board needs subpoena power to compel witnesses in police files. Both the previous board and the existing board do not have those duties, that authority. These recommendations here, when these recommendations aren't put in place, we have seen time and time again from city after city that residents are not satisfied, that there's not a feeling of true accountability, a feeling of true transparency, and police abuse and misconduct continues to take place. If the city of Evanston is going to be really serious about addressing systemic inequality and systemic racism, it really needs to take a hard look at what it's going to really take to undo decades and decades of institutional racism in police departments. And that is why a civilian review board with these powers that we are recommending, with these duties, is absolutely essential to move forward in the 21st century. Thank you.
Thanks, Austin. I want to thank you for attending, but before we sign off and everything, and as you see this slide, we are inviting you to an action meeting on May the 19th. That meeting, we will be setting up committees that will help us to keep watch on the data that is being input on the dashboard here in Evanston, and what is also being sent to the Illinois Department of Transportation to help us to analyze that information to make sure that the glitch that was found back in October has been cleared and set up. The next committee we would be asking to work with us is to help get out the word and to help promote, to have the Civilian Police Oversight Board, EVA, put in place so that the complaints that citizens file against police officers for misconduct will be handled in a fairly appropriate amount of time. We need your help to make this happen, because this will be for you to protect your rights here in the city of Evanston and the visitors that come to the city of Evanston. So I want to thank you, and we will be looking for you. Hopefully we will see you in person. If not, then we have to see you virtually, and we will improve on this. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you all.